autobiographical with your hosts, Andrew Bonner
and Chris Ramos.
Tonight, we review one of the most, or at least that's on a short
Acclaimed.
list. Acclaimed. It's on a very well-regarded book. It's called Blankets by Craig Thompson. It's an original graphic novel. Fun fact, Craig Thompson is also from Wisconsin, and we might be from Wisconsin. So it was really cool to read about one of the writers that are kind of from our home state. So that was really interesting. And Blankets is one of those books that I've heard a lot of talk about in the community, but this is my first time reading it.
Same here. Yeah, Blankets actually is one of the what people would call, artist. Writer creator,
Yes.
So Craig wrote it and he illustrated the whole thing, and I think they complement each other, which is great because of course you'd want them to, but they complement each other because of just the way his writing is. It's not like quick or over the top or anything. The illustrations sort of match the mood that he's in during that scene. So
yeah,
it's really.
And this was very early. He hadn't really written too many books before this. And so this was kind of really, he had one book before this called Goodbye Chunky Rice in 1999. But in 2003, he came out with this book. And wow, when he did, he was on the scene.
Yeah,
he got on everyone's radar, even
for a debut.
Yeah, for a debut, and
novel.
Just really got like national, international recognition for this book. It was it's what was it, 6-7 time Eisner Award winning book for it. It's really quite astonishing. In 2004, he won Eisner for Best Graphic Novel, Best Writer, Harvey Award for Best Artist, Best Cartoonist.
All the accolades you would want.
All the ones. Most people that have been working in the industry for a long time can't even get to those spaces. That's it's something they strive for, and just to do that early on, it's
like the
wow.
Goodwill Hunting of of graphic novels
for real. So that was wow, okay, and for us, we're kind of just hearing about it just in circles, but nothing. We haven't really ever dug into it so much. So this was a really interesting read for us to do.
Well, and I think it also follows along where we kind of are, I feel like, bouncing back and forth between what we would consider indie comics and mainstream comics, and then back to creator comics, and then over to self-published comics.
Right.
And, there's a lot of great stories out there, and there's a lot of I guess autobiographical stories that need to be told or should be told, and this is the medium to do it. So that's what Craig wanted to do, is at least originally start telling this story, but change a lot of details so it wasn't really about him.
Yes, it was his life, but it was told from his memories and perspectives.
So still could have other people. He was just gonna say these are stories of mine, and I'm translating it into other people living this, but then it became autobiographical.
Yes.
So he put himself back in there.
Yeah. And that's a really hard process to do, I think, or some people find that, it's an easy story to tell, or I like talking about myself, and other people are like, I don't feel comfortable doing that. So for him to do this is a tough subject, but it's really worth telling about. Not that saying that this is a book of tragedy or a book of learning and stuff, but it was just a really well thought out story. Lots of great meaning to it, and I really enjoyed this book.
Me too. And even just starting it out, actually, I was surprised by the time you get to the end of the book, just how much time has progressed. So
how long would you say?
Well, I mean, when he is. I'm looking at the first few pages when he's telling his brother. Craig has a younger brother, Phil, yeah, in the comic, and it sort of starts out of just the two of them, and sort of that brotherly mischief and brotherly love and brotherly setting each other up. They share a bed, so it's kind of funny that they come up with these crazy, wacky stories of what can you do to stay awake
Sure, you're right.
And then also, how far can you push your parents before they just like tell you to
and
go to bed?
This is also in the setting of Wisconsin. So, and this is during usually the winter time, where it's a lot of the story takes place during the winter.
Yeah, and
so there's not a lot that goes on in the winter, especially if you're in a rural town or things like that. You kind of have to do your own fun, or you have to entertain yourselves.
And they live in a little farmhouse, and it's like, he is always saying it's just in the middle of Wisconsin, and but he makes comment that his brother, he says, just wait till you get to third grade. So I'm going to assume his brother's like in second grade.
Sure.
And then maybe
he's maybe a couple years, I think 2 or 3 years. I think he's like 3 years older. Yeah.
I mean, he's not terribly older.
And you're right. And I think by the time they get done with the book, they get to like end of high school, college.
Well, like he's moved out.
And yeah. And you kind of see him as young, like adult on his own.
Yeah. So Craig must have already been moving on into his early 20s. Well, he said so the book was finished when he was 23 years old.
That's true.
He said that the last chunk of it was like in live moments.
Yeah. So he probably was in his early 30s. Yeah.
No, 20s, because he'd have 20s. To be 3 years took him to make the book.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So now that we've established that.
time is happening.
We've established time.
Yeah. So it kind of takes you on this journey of like a day in the life of, him and his brother, kind of what they were experiencing growing up and what that was like. His parents that are in the story, they're a little more stricter, I guess, but not too bad. But there's nuances that come along with it. Yeah.
Well, and you can tell, so like the kids at school, so there's like the typical bullying, and there's the typical, they do a great job of like, there was that one scene where like they're on the bus and like all the different people on the bus, like there's like metalhead guys, and like farmer guys,
very clicky things.
So they do a good job of showing that. And then unfortunately, Craig is sort of a string bean of a kid. He's just like, not much.
They're kind of outcasts among them. Yeah.
Mass to him.
Sure.
So he gets picked on just for being like, looking like a little baby kind of thing.
Right.
So the bullies and the way that Craig sort of, I want to say, illustrates what's happening.
Yeah.
Even like the one part where one of the bullies gives him a bloody nose.
Yes.
And it's just like hectic pages of him trying to clean himself up in the bathroom and just get ready and then get back into class. And then when he gets to class is, typical, like he thinks he's reinventing the wheel with his essays and his homework, and the teacher is like, this isn't what we're talking about. This isn't religious enough. And
so
then they start getting
went to a religious school. That was one of the big reveals at the beginning. It's like, we're going to talk about religion in this book.
Yeah.
And how he kind of grew up with it, and how he encountered it, and how he kind of dealt with it, and how that affected him growing up. That was one of the themes, I guess.
Yeah, like he wrote a poem, and that's what his teacher was yelling at him about. And then later on,
because it was like not not a satire, but like just explaining like what he thought of that part of that religion or something like that, or Christianity and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then you get back, and then you kind of like start piecing together. That's what I really liked about the beginning of this, is that it just sort of starts, and like, I guess whenever you're starting a book or you're starting anything that's even a movie, you have to start piecing together, like, who are these people? What's the dynamic? Where are they living? What's the
feel? What's the tone?
Yeah. Like, what's the home life like? It looks like his parents, always kind of did their own thing. His mom seems to be always in her chair reading the Bible, literally. Dad's always like watching TV. So, so it's just kind of like, they were there, but you could tell it was a little stressed relationship.
Absolutely. And I think readers can go in this book and they can see some of themselves in Craig and Phil.
Yeah.
And, your home life growing up, and just see like what was the similar differences, between the two. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so everybody's got their own story.
So you start realizing that he is a little bit of a, imagination based boy, and he does drawings, and
that's one. Like he Craig Thompson, he was talking about some of the interviews. He would just doodle in his book when he would do notes or things like that. And so he was like, I've been doodling since I've kind of grown up. It's just developing that style.
Yeah, it's just a thing. So that kind of translates into him just having a great imagination and imagination with his brother,
Right.
and just kind of like you were saying, crawling around through the woods or just
Yeah.
trying to even drawing together. And that was a big deal for them, is that the brothers would end up drawing together.
Right.
And
that was a great way to bond and just talk the same language a little bit.
He even said that, where was it? Oh, yeah. My other getaway car was drawing, where my brother accompanied me at the wheel. He didn't share my escapist approach, it seemed, but drew as much spending time with me and connecting with me.
Right. And so Craig Thompson, he illustrates it by that panel of him being in a race car. Then but even then I knew I was powerless to enact such maneuver. And it's like the race car is torn apart, like by pieces. And then it goes that the real world could only deliver new threats. And then it kind of goes on and on, but he illustrates like his thoughts in like the panel, so like that next panel after the car's broken apart is like scary monsters just rising above his head.
Well, and even the last panel there, it says an entire day would be consumed by drawing, interspersed with fits of running around outside, expending our energy. These were the only wakeful moments of my childhood that I can recall feeling life was sacred or worthwhile.
Right.
So, he would do things like that, and then it would bring the tone really serious. And then you would think, so he's telling these sort of pocket stories, these little tiny things of his childhood that he remembers, because obviously you wouldn't be able to illustrate your entire childhood. So and I think we all have that. There's certain moments that just pop into our memory of like, hey, that was a great memory, and that was a great memory,
right?
And even going back, if you wrote everything down now and then came back to it 10 years later, you'd be like, I don't remember.
No, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So, memory, I've always been fascinated by that, just the way that people piece things together, and just, if two people had the same experience, like, are they totally in line with their memory of it?
Right. Yeah.
And that's what Craig really starts playing with, is what was he wanting to happen, and then what did happen.
Right.
And like now he's illustrating it 15 years later.
Yeah. And some of these sequences are almost like sometimes when he's illustrating his dreams or whatnot, they're very fantasy, whimsical, big swooshes, tangles, clouds, everything, like big leaves, some monsters, like you say.
Yeah, spirits. You could tell there was just like lots of
imagination
and just topics, lots of topics for him. He always, and then it always snaps back into like religion. Like,
right.
Boom.
It always kind of comes around to that because that's what he's just surrounded by. And I don't know if religion was forced upon him, but he just grew up with it. So that's all he ever knew.
Yeah.
But then when you grow up, you're like, kind of not questioning it, but you're just like, oh, why is this the way it is? And then kind of learning, how to go about your own journey with that.
Yeah. And there's a part here where I had this marked too, where when he was done, so he was very religious. He would do drawings, and then he would read the Bible, and he would go back to talk to his pastor, and then he'd be like, what should I be doing? Yes. And the pastor says, well, you should be focusing on being a pastor, or pursuing the clergy.
And that's kind of like the path that they were like kind of pushing on him a bit. You should do that because that's what we think you're good at.
And so he was sort of like torn between this. So then what he would do is he would take things that he remembered or things that he drew, and he would burn them in that barrel.
Yes.
So it was like a big part of him to sort of reset all the time, where he wanted to like burn his memories of things. Which is really sad, because like when you burn something, it's just like it's totally
gone. You're trying to put it to rest. Yeah. You're remembering it, but you just you wanted to bury it. And the way he does that and presents that was like, that's pretty heavy, and kind of tense.
And that's what really got me, because it's like, okay, so you're illustrating a comic, a graphic novel that we're reading about your memories of the childhood.
Yes.
And then it's interspersed with you burning things to sort of stop your own memory of those events.
Wow. Yeah. It's kind of meta.
Yeah. And I was like, well, that's just really weird, because here you're telling us that, look, I'm burning all my drawings while we're reading your drawings.
And maybe he kind of regretted doing that, but that's something that he was kind of stressed about, or he's encountering, and he's like, no, this is the journey I'm not supposed to be going on. Drawing's not for me, even though I love to draw.
Yeah, it was like the most definitive way that he could reset his life at that time.
Yeah, that was powerful. Absolutely.
So yeah, and it goes back into, them as kids. And I do kind of want to throw out a little bit of a warning, but there are some very, very personal details in this comic.
Yes.
That
it's a very mature book.
It's a mature book, and it's like what if everyone had like the courage to sort of almost illustrate their private diary.
Yeah, it is very much a private journal or a diary, like you mentioned. Yeah, it is very much of that.
He's like, I'm going to turn this into
but it's not really leaving. It's not leaving too much out. And yeah, like we kind of talk about, he talks about religion. He talks about his thoughts on love, sex, drugs, all the whole spectrum, really. And so on anything else that he found that he was kind of wronged in his life. So
yeah, and even the way that he wanted to live at his farm, and then when he ended up pursuing life as, well, I'm going to be a pastor. Yes. Then he went to Bible camp.
Yeah. So
and it was really different from what you would think Bible camp was. But he's like, it was the middle of nowhere Bible camp. And there were a lot of people who were serious.
But he still got bullied. He still got bullied there when he went there. So he was kind of hanging around the same people he went to school with, because it was a Christian school. He still got bullied by the same crowd, and he wasn't necessarily came from a wealthier family. He couldn't afford to go on the ski hill, so everybody made fun of him.
That's right.
Because he went on a snow trip, but he couldn't afford to go skiing. So that was like how he dealt with that, and just trying to make friends or find somebody that could connect with them or just survive it.
Yeah, and it was cool because it's like the same groups of people. There's like, again, like some sort of biker guys or metalheads and all,
Yes.
And he had no defense against that, so he just sort of like fell into himself.
Yeah, he was trying to just read the Bible just to pass along, and they were making fun of him for reading the Bible
at Bible camp.
Which meant that people who were going didn't really necessarily believe it. They were just there to be there, almost.
Yeah, just to get away.
Right.
And that's where he met Raina.
Yep, Raina, yes. So this is, as you develop the story, this is the character he starts to fall in love with. This is one of his earliest, girlfriends in his young adulthood, and first like serious relationship.
Is where he would say, I think that's where you start seeing that this is a coming of age book, because not that every coming of age has to have some sort of like dating part of it, but
it's
that just becomes a natural progression of that age group. And for him, he was getting a little independence. Yes. And so his independence started leading into, I've met this girl, and what should I do? How should I pursue this?
Right. Yeah. And just how he develops that friendship that became a relationship, ultimately, as every awkward teenager does.
Yeah. Through high school, here is what's happening. Yes. This is high school summers at Bible camp.
Yes. Yep. Yep. As one does, like they hide underneath like the stage, and they everybody's leaving for the ski trip, and they're like, oh, we're just gonna hang out here.
Yeah, so
that was kind of cool.
He starts seeing in Raina that she is a little more like fly by night a little bit. Like she's not so bent up on having everything explained or have a purpose to everything. She's more like,
very more free, kind of represented all the values that he didn't have growing up. And
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And just that's how they kind of bond. It was like, wow, you're so free, you're so open-minded, and we don't necessarily have to follow the rules, but we respect them.
Well, and she picked up on his sort of awkwardness around.
And yes, they're both
people she knew.
Awkward. Yeah.
So she's like, all right, so you don't like
people.
Yeah. So it's like, you don't like parties, fine.
Yeah.
And, you're not really
she was.
Sports,
she was more of the social person. Yep. As she grew up.
So she's like, all right, we can get out of here. Just the two of us. Let's just go see if we can go for a walk or whatever.
Yes. And it's really cool to like pick up all the references, as like we're seeing the story develop. Like in the beginning, they were wearing like Batman, Superman shirts.
Mhm.
Like I just opened the page. There's a Misfits like jacket.
Yeah.
Just a little neat pop culture references. Like they're just, if you could flip the page and not notice them, but if you look at the detail.
Well,
we were talking about in the pre-show. They mentioned Farm and Fleet.
yes.
Yes.
And there's like living waters and other
Yeah,
things.
so things if you know in the area or just the small pop culture reference, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. All right.
Well, and
Gives you a sense of place.
that's the other kind of give props to him for just his illustration is I think his illustrating is very like loose.
Mhm.
Just a lot of his lines are just really like swoopy, which is cool
Yes.
because it just shows like movement and just sort of shows like maybe that this memory isn't as crystal clear as you think it is. It's just sort of like we were walking through the woods and it's like swoopy through the woods, you don't
Yes.
need much more than that.
Right. Um, so how would you describe this art style to our listeners?
Well, I was trying to really kind of see it evolving as you read. So part of it is real like pen and ink sort of brush
Yes.
work. And
Hmm.
then when it gets serious or scary or um, where it's like nighttime, he does a lot of like dry brush and a lot of just sort of scratchy black.
Yeah.
And he does a really good job of balancing like that black and white. There's no
Hmm.
color in here, which is
Yes.
great. That's what you were
And
saying.
we were kind of talking about also, I don't think you could do this book in color.
No.
I don't think it would have the same impact. I think without color, you get to focus more on the emotion and what's being said. Even though, like, yeah, maybe in another universe this could have been colored and done well, but I think it shows more the originality, and you're drawing in, you're investing more. You can focus in on
Yeah.
things.
And if I were to guess, and maybe Craig will email me and say, you got it wrong. But if I were to guess, he's using either like just like a micron, like a sharp tip, because
Okay.
whenever he draws Raina, she's always very crisp. Like
Yes.
the memory he has of her is very crisp.
Oh, that's
And
intentional.
yeah,
Yes.
I think so. And then whenever he draws like a bully or other people, he doesn't want to give them too much detail. He doesn't give them too much life in his
Right.
story. So it's
Yeah.
really like just sort of a dry brush, like a brush marker
Mhm.
or a brush pen that you can just sort of rough up a little bit.
Yes.
And I do like with his characters, everyone just sort of has like a little dot for eyes and this little like
Right.
shape of a nose.
Yeah, it's I like the figures. They look super well done. The way it is, the environments are, it's not overly complicated and detailed, but it gives you a sense of place. Some great line work and shading, I think, came a long way. Like the contrast of like using the white space and black to just fill it in and give it some rough it out or
It's
just give it some
definitely
motion.
illustration-y because
Yes.
sometimes people have awkward faces or
Oh, right. And I think that's on purpose.
yeah,
Yeah.
over stylized limbs or they're taller than they should or shorter than they
Right.
should be
Yes.
or like the
Yeah, we were
background
talking
is
about that. There's a couple like podcasting and stuff. They were like talking about like how, in the panels, sometimes the characters, he'll illustrate the characters to be bigger if he wants them to be like intense
Mhm.
and overpowering, or small if they were like awkward and shy, or just he really had a interesting viewpoint for like how he wanted to panel this book.
Yeah, I mean, and he definitely has some skills as far as the illustration aspect of it, like
Yes.
how the panels move from one panel to the next and how much text there is. And I
Yeah.
think he has a big how do I want to say it? He has a big bonus going that he is doing the lettering
Yeah.
because the
Actually, that
lettering is
is
like
true.
all over the place and it's in different ways and it's like in the
Yeah. He
corners
was
and
very
it's under.
free with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like if you took this and then went the traditional route of like a very
No.
structured
Yeah.
computerized
Mhm.
lettering, you're not going to get this.
No.
It's really really fun because he still does like the regular bubbles, the little text
Right.
bubbles, but just something about hand drawn, hand illustrated lettering along with his hand drawn, hand painted
Hmm.
illustrations is very 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 cool.
Right. And it kind of goes along with him talking about him being in the book as a cartoonist and then being a cartoonist drawing.
Yes.
So that's kind of like a cool meta thing. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's cool. And just, it kind of goes through the book, and he does sound effects. He does it all. And it's a great work.
Yeah. So then like somewhere in the middle of the story or so, Raina like comes up to Wisconsin.
Yes.
And a snowstorm blocks her.
Mm-hmm.
So she has her license. So you're like, oh, okay, she can drive. Mm-hmm. So she just had to get out of her house because her parents were having a divorce.
Yeah, that was.
So she tried to drive to see him.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of along the lines when they were writing back and forth to each other. They were like pen pals. Yeah. She lives in Michigan.
Yeah, they were pen pals for probably during the winter, I would say. One of their winters.
A good full year, maybe.
Yeah, even. after going to Bible camp, summer camp and things like that. They're like, oh yeah, we'll write to each other because they're trying to do the long distance relationship before phones and texting and things like that.
Well, and at that time they were just sort of talking to each other.
Yes, they were just talking like, hey, how's it going? What's going on in your life?
And he lived in Wisconsin. She lived in Michigan. So somehow she decided to drive 6 hours to come try to visit him.
Right. And yeah.
It didn't work. So she went back home, but she at least told him that she tried that. So that sort of spurred him to say, hey, Mom, can I go to Raina's house in Michigan for
it came up with this 2 weeks. It was like going to be a couple days, and they were like, oh, just do
which I was surprised his parents even allowed him to do that at all.
Yeah, he fought for it.
Yeah, and they didn't really structure it like that was a thing, though, you know? So it's like, boy.
Yeah. Right. I don't know how many people could get away with that at that age. That's kind of hard, you know. And things
especially
like
with his parents being religious. And so his dad was like, well, if you get good grades and you eat your meat and all that stuff. So it was funny.
Yeah, because he's a vegetarian.
That's right.
Growing up in the story. So his dad always made fun of him, or as I guess his mom didn't really make fun
Want
of
him to eat meat.
You eat your meat. Why not? I'm a vegetarian, Dad. Nope, you're gonna eat your meat. Just trying to make Craig be more like him, I guess, or trying to man him up, I guess, or how.
And he told his mom that we are just friends. We're not, boyfriend, girlfriend. Then he said that she has a spare bedroom kind of thing.
Right. So. And her parents are very religious too. Yeah. You're trying to play that up angle too. But it'll be fine.
So they met, like Gary, Indiana, maybe.
Yeah. It was like they were about equal distance. I think there was like a 5, right
on the corner.
So they do that and they're like, oh, hey, make small talk. And then, he goes back to stay at Raina's for like 2 weeks. Comes to find out when they get there, their parents are, they haven't filed, I think, formally for divorce, but they're going through the early stages of it.
Yeah. And so what did you think of his stay with Raina? I mean, I think that's kind of like where they really figured out how it would be if they were with each other out in real life.
Right.
Like to me, that was like real life.
Yeah, that was real life for them. I thought that was a very turning point, and just trying to realize, what that relationship could look like in later life. Could you live with that person long term?
Yeah. He saw a side of her that obviously wasn't shown at Bible camp because she was taking care of her adopted brother and sister.
Yep.
Who both have like Down syndrome.
Yes.
And so she was showing.
He never grew up with any of that.
No. And so she showed that whole side of her that she can really care for people.
Right. Yeah.
No matter what.
Right. And she made him like a whole quilt and everything. And
that was cool.
That was cool. He's like, oh, okay. And she's like, hey, I want you to paint a corner of my room because it's all full of poster stuff, but I know you're an artist. I love your art. Could you do that? And he's like, oh, I don't know what to paint.
Yeah.
And then she's like, oh, you'll figure it out.
Well, what I really liked too was, so like at his house, his parents weren't really super involved. So his brother and him had to come up with imagination games, right? And then at her house, her parents weren't really involved because they're getting divorced. So she didn't have anyone to really like come up and do imagination games with her. So her room was very cluttered. It was just all sorts of.
It looks like very grunge.
Yeah.
Early 2000s, late 90s, early grunge scene.
And just tons of stuff to keep her mind like busy and active. And then she helped around the house a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's good to mention that she had to almost be the parent figure for her two adopted siblings, because
Yeah.
her mother and father, yes, they were involved, but they couldn't be there all the time. One parent would stay in the house while the other one was out, I guess, staying at a different apartment. I think, yeah, somebody got an apartment or something. So they would take turns, like they would have a day shift, night shift, or taking people to school or not. Or
Well, and
picking
that
them up.
kind of kept um it kind of kept her from running away with him too.
Oh,
You know,
yeah,
like
totally.
they wanted to just, and that was, you kind of saw things sort of growing with them.
Hmm.
And, she wasn't really going to school all that much, which I was like, what is she doing now? Like, is she, and, they made comment that like, you should go to school. You can't just sit at home with Craig. So I was thinking,
Oh,
well,
yeah, because they were playing hooky almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, so then she like took him to school 1 or 2 days, but like
Yeah,
for the
but
most part, they just sort of like hanging out at the house, and her parents
yes.
didn't really care at that point because they had other things going on.
Right. They have the grapes to prove that, when they do spend time in school, they're in it. They take it seriously. It was also interesting how, like, Craig and Rainer were kind of coming to terms with their religious beliefs, where some of them are
Yeah.
aligned and some of them are different. And then, he goes to illustrate, like Craig, like the writer goes to like illustrate like these scenes of like, what would Jesus do? Things like
Yeah.
that. And I was like, oh, I didn't know this would happen. Okay, that's kind of interesting, or
Well, like
maybe
even
his
with,
interpretation of that.
yeah, and like even with her, that's a good point. Some of these could have just been interpretations of what, him and Raina were feeling when they were around each other.
Oh, yeah.
Because most of the time too, she was home taking care of her whole family, and
Yes.
her and Craig just sort of hung out with each other, but it wasn't like, you know, they could watch a movie together, and
No.
she was always pulled in some other direction.
Yeah, and helping her sister, her brother, I think it was Billy or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, he was very inclusive. He was very super shy, or he didn't know how to express himself in the right way. So he would always be in his room. And so he had very minimal reaction, and they were like trying to like, hey, you should come be a part of this. And he's like, no, I don't want to
Hmm.
be part of it. Whereas her adopted sister, she wanted to like be over almost like all the time. They had to be there. And if she wasn't around them, she'd be upset.
Yeah.
So that was really a hard thing for Craig. Didn't think that he'd be ready for that. He didn't think he just wanted to spend time with her mostly and not be like this whole family thing. But
Well, and for him too, I think when he originally wanted to go out there, it was because he just wanted to spend more time with her.
yeah,
And then when he was spending time with her, that's where I really appreciated the pacing of
yes,
the book. And everyone who's going to read this will also understand, there's purposeful pacing to it, because
yeah,
he could have summed up things, he could have just jumped to conclusions, but
sure.
it was like, this is really what
He wanted to
the
spend
days
time
were,
on,
this is what
right.
the weeks were, and it wasn't maybe what people thought, and they wasn't what you would expect, and that's just sometimes what life is just not
Right.
your plan is
Yeah,
just not your plan. So
exactly. And it was that point of like, when does he tell her he wants to take their friendship to dating,
right,
to a
right.
more serious level? And
And
that's
even
always a
as
hard conversation to have.
right, and
It's
well,
like, but you're in your house too.
and they live 2 states away, and so is that even
Yeah,
possible?
right.
So
So like, he's like madly crushing on her. She is like, she likes him a lot. But she's like whining to him. It's always that classic going back and
yeah.
forth, but it provides a great storytelling and great character development.
So yeah, so I mean, to kind of jump away from it, and we were being very careful through the book. I don't want to like
Yes,
ruin the story
you're
for
right.
anyone, because really you should read it for yourself, of course. But the overarching themes of it is, to me, like, w- what would you do in that situation? And then
Yes.
also, like, how is this changing Craig's personality?
Yeah.
Because it really makes him think about,
Hmm.
is he going to be a pastor? Does he
Yes.
want to pursue religion? Is
Hmm.
he seeing that
No,
there's
because he's
things?
constantly going back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, he was into religion, but that's because that's all he knew. And then he kind of got away from it. Like,
Right.
he saw a
Because he
little
was
bigger
forced upon it at
picture.
an early age, and he's like, I don't know
Yeah.
if that's my
And like, that was his city, and that was
feeling.
like
Yeah.
his group. And then once he kind of like got over the white picket fence, he was
Yeah.
like, wait, I don't know if this is right for me. So
Right.
that's where it becomes a coming of age, is because you're learning about yourself.
Yeah.
And Craig started realizing that, you know, while he does care for a lot of people, I also
Mhm.
felt like he thought that he wasn't doing enough for people. And so
Yes.
like he didn't he had a good relationship with his brother, but just like all brothers and sisters relationships, it kind of
Yeah.
changes over time
Changes. They
as you get
kind of
older.
yeah. It was interesting. Like once you start getting more involved with Raina, how little he, or at least the amount of talking about Phil would be a little less. I mean, he would bring
Yeah,
him up in
that's
like
true.
early childhood stories or like things like that, just getting to know each other. Like, oh, we did this. We didn't have this growing up, but me and my brother did this. He had some of that. But then, when they're like the same age in high school, they kind of grew apart, I felt like.
Yeah. Or like even Raina herself, of just saying like, you know, I appreciate you here a lot. And it was like just a sort of escape for her.
Hmm.
And then you were wondering like, well, she's got so much stress at home. Like what exactly is Craig to her?
Right.
It's like, is he just sort of this, you know, I don't
Like
want
like
like,
almost like a support.
yeah, or like, is he there because she remembered those good days with him? So then she's
Yes.
like, "You're here to take my mind off of what's happening at the
Right.
house, right?"
Exactly.
And
And
then,
I think I think you hit it right on the head. I think, yeah, it's kind of like towards the middle or the end of it where I think or not Craig's dad, Raina's dad's like, you being here was one of the most best experiences for us that we could have as a family because you kind of
yeah.
held us together through all this and made it less depressing and
So
sad than it was.
he
And
was
I
like
was
the
like,
buffer
he
for
was
all
kind
of
of the
the
buffer.
fun.
But that family kind of needed reminding each other like why they're a family,
Yeah.
and he was kind of there just to kind of help them through that a little bit.
Well, he probably stopped them from, getting in fights and
Getting
stuff
in
too,
fights,
because
being violent. Like what was it? Raina's older sister. We found out like yeah, she has an older sister, and she just kind of drops their like kid off, their baby off,
oh, that's right.
newborn off, and just like here you go, we're gonna go on a vacation, yeah,
Yeah.
because we don't have to watch him 24/7. Here you go, and they're like, okay.
Well, and everyone sees Raina as the mature person that
Yes.
always is going to be there to just take care of people.
Right.
So, they're like, "Oh, Raina, yeah, just stay home from school and just watch them," or "Hey,
Yeah,
Raina,
since you're
here's this."
home.
Yeah. And the whole like end of the book here, I'm not going to say anything about it
Right.
because maybe the last last 100 pages or
Sure.
so. And when we say 100 pages of this book, I mean it's pretty easy reading, and it's pretty uh, uh, I think the flow goes really well. But
Yes.
the last 100 pages kind of goes back into what is now Craig's decision for the future, per trajectory of his life.
Yes.
He's shown like when he was a kid, then he was shown when he was in high school, and then
Yeah.
his sort of first flame, and then
Mm-hmm.
his desire to pursue that or pursue the pastor, or the clergy, or
Yeah.
what's he going to do? Is he going to move back home and live with his parents? Does he want to get out of there?
Yeah. What
So
what looks like after they have their 2 weeks
yeah.
together. Yeah. What they eventually, he goes back home.
And
uh,
it's like you think back, like in high school, was there 2 weeks that changed the trajectory of your own life?
yeah.
Like maybe. I mean,
Sure.
and that's kind of like what he's trying to write here is, this is how I thought my life was going. And then I
Right.
met this girl, and she
Yeah.
was very different, and she lived very different, and her family was different. And
Yes.
then now what does that mean for me?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, we got to see some of the interviews while researching this book that he wrote that almost in real time, where he was kind of went back as he was writing the book and he kind of went back to his
Yeah, he
family
was like in
and
his early 20s.
kind of reflected on, how we thought about his childhood growing up and kind of wrote what he felt and what does it look like now? What still say the same? What's a
Well, and
little
I guess
different?
he didn't know entirely how to end the
He
book.
did it.
Like,
Yes, he had
yeah.
trouble ending the book,
So then he
which
was
that
like,
kind
"Well,
of
where
makes
do I
sense if
stop?"
you're, yeah, exactly. Like, how much of your life do you want to put in this book? You had such a dramatic arc over the whole book. I mean, you're telling your kind of semi-autobiographical, and
Well, it's funny because he was like in his early 20s, and the book almost caught up to him.
right,
Like it caught up exactly to where he was. And he was like, now I'm here in the book.
Yes.
That's
and
really
so
a
it
weird
was kind
thing.
of, just kind of reflecting back on it. I will say it was pretty powerful once you finished it. And you're like, wow.
Yeah.
And yeah. So the pacing in this book, it's really fast, or at least you could do 100 pages and just go, wow.
Yeah,
That was quick.
I
I
could see
did it
that.
in like 2 sittings.
Yeah.
Is it the way it's supposed to be done? I don't know.
I had to get the book from the library. So that's another thing. A lot of these books that we're talking about that are what people would consider indie books or self-published
Yep.
books, or check your library. Usually libraries have a great selection of those. They don't have to always be mainstream. And actually, on the flip side, if you're looking for something super mainstream, usually your library doesn't have that. So,
Yeah.
it's nice to have something like that.
Some other
happy
resources
medium.
and things to explore. Absolutely.
And it was great because our library rebounded into like a funky
Oh,
hardcover.
that's
So if for me, I was actually reading a hardcover, which is not a hardcover.
No, this is a soft cover. Yeah, my friend loved me, and that's kind of where it came from. It was like, this has been sitting on the shelf. We heard about it. I was like, yeah, let's try it. Overall, a great story. Craig Thompson still writes and publishes books today.
I kind of want to look up his other books too.
Yeah. So some of the titles.
Was it No More Sticky Rice?
That was Goodbye Chunky Rice was his first book. Right.
No More Sticky Rice.
Cabernet Voyage, Hanabi. That was kind of a recent one.
Yes.
Space
he traveled
Dumplings.
the world after this book.
Yes, and then he just put one out. Yeah, 2001. Trying to look. Ginseng Roots. He was kind of promoting at the time. He just got nominated for that a couple of years ago. So, he's still doing stuff today. I know when he was, when I was watching some of those mid 2000s interviews, he was like, I don't want to go too fantasy, but at the same time, I want to do something, a little more politics and social. Saying something about the social dynamics of the time. So he was kind of trying to find a good blend of the two. So, and that you kind of feel that when you're reading Blankets, you're like, okay, he wants to say something too.
Yeah. I mean, he wants to
not be say it like in front of your face, but he wants to
say,
say,
and he's not trying to like
make
change
a commentary
your
about
viewpoint, but he is also saying like, this is me and this is why, like he rarely makes a statement in here that he doesn't try to back up, which is cool that, if he makes a judgment call, he says, well, this is why I feel that way. This is what happened to me or something like that.
Exactly. It's kind of interesting how just a little retrospect. We've read several, black and white books. We've read Sin City. We read Monsters.
Mouse.
I think, and I think he mentions like Art Spiegelman was one of his heroes or something like that. When you look in the feel of original graphic novels, like Mouse was Art Spiegelman. He kind of changed the game. And so when we were kind of looking like this, each book, it had its own style and its own truth and what the artist wanted to say. And some they were both like, they were the artist and they were the writer. So everyone has their own truth to say, or just something they wanted to share or tell a story.
And if you're compelled to tell a story in this medium, go for it.
Yeah.
Even if you have to find an artist, go for it.
Right. It was really cool. And I'm glad we read this. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely a great one, especially the squeaking in at the end of the year. But so go find it, see where you can source it out. The paperback is regularly available.
Yeah, I think it's evergreen.
Right?
Yeah, it's evergreen status.
It's everywhere. So check it out. Check your local libraries and your local used bookstores. And it's a great read. Blankets.
Yes. This is another great episode of Fan Pow Comic Hour. This is Andrew Glonner
and Chris Ramos
signing off.
Goodbye.